Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Ratliff Mandolins weekly production diary series. My name is Audie Ratliff, and I have got something different for you this week. For those of you who are following the series, you know that we are working on a batch of mandolins, and right now that batch of mandolins is pretty much having all the binding put on, and so we're doing all the work around the scroll, carving it out, cutting it out and all like that. And last week's episode I showed a small clip of a mandolin there with a whole bunch of pencil lines and everything, all squiggly lines all over that scroll. And believe it or not, I had a fella call me on the telephone and said, what was all that business with those squiggly lines all around that scroll? And I told him, you know what, if you'll check out this video, I will be happy to explain all of that to you. And so that's what this week's video is going to focus on. It's going to be Mandolin Scrolls 101. I should probably take a moment here to explain to you that very early in my career I had maybe 8 or 10 mandolins built. I had the wonderful opportunity to spend an afternoon with 2 late 1920s Lloyd Loar signed mandolins. And the owner of those 2 mandolins was very gracious and generous, offered to let me take body tracings and all the measurements, even provided the pencils and the paper. And so I sat for 2 hours and studied those mandolins and took measurements and body tracings and peghead tracings and everything I needed to go home and build a mold off of that body shape. And probably for the next 75 or 100 mandolins, I used that mold. Now, when I started building mandolins a little more in mass, I decided I needed more than one mold. And after building 75 or 100 mandolins with that mold, I began to see things that I wasn't really happy with, and I thought, if I'm going to build 5 or 6 molds, maybe I should fix these little issues that I'm not really happy with about this mandolin right here. And so to show you that, I probably just need to get a pencil and a piece of paper and draw it out so that you can see what I'm talking about. Let me do that. So now I have crudely drawn some stuff out here that I hope will help me explain the 2 issues that I had with the Loar molds. And I also have a mandolin here that hopefully I can illustrate with. And even today, the first thing that I look at when I pick up somebody else's mandolin, whether it's a factory job or one made by a single individual, will be this whole shoulder area right here. And I want this side and this side to more or less match, with the heel button coming out right in the middle of this whole shape. Quite often it's not. And I had that same issue with the Loar molds. And let's just take a closer examination right here. This shoulder area on the scroll side quite often drops off at a much steeper angle than this side right here, making it very out of whack and not symmetrical. And so that was my big issue number 1. And that shows up even more so on the front of the instrument, because here you have those 15th fret cross pieces that sort of magnify that whole effect. And quite often, if you look at one, you'll see that this one will be nice and even and pretty, and this one over here will be so much smaller and misshapen and carved at a different angle and everything, because there's just simply no room to put that in there. So there's my main complaint number 1. Complaint number 2 is the actual shape of the scroll. Quite often you will see that this area right here, this measurement between this point and this point, will be a lot less than, say, the measurement between this point and this point. And to my eye, well, at first when you look at it, if it's just a quick glance, you don't even see this. But after you sit back and start looking at it, you go, oh my, that looks so out of whack and so misshapen that it just looks awful. So I wanted to address those two issues. Now, where did I start? Well, the first thing that I started with was let's just work on the shoulder area problem. And let's just draw out basically an A style right here. And let's place the 15th fret cross piece. It's going to be put right here. And say that's a no cross line. The scroll cannot encroach on anything above that line right there. So we're going to start it right here. And we penciled that in up to about right here and said, okay, now we want this thing to just continually slightly swell this measurement right here, 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 all the way around in a radial line, so to speak, to slightly swell and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then at some point we're going to stop here and swoop it into the body. And that's basically what I've done. That's basically I've done it. Just kept making the measurements and making it a pencil width wider and wider and wider and wider until I eventually come up with this right here. And that sort of fixed all of the issues. I had a even shoulder area here, and when you sit back and really examine this, it's quite pleasing, and that flare is quite pleasing to the eye, and it doesn't look X-shaped or out of shape in any way, shape, or form. And then to that A-style mold, I simply put these right back where they were on the lower molds, and I'm perfectly happy with the body style. And that leads me right into the fellow on the telephone wanting to know what was all those squiggly lines about. Let me show you. First, let me explain that this mandolin flares out here. What I'm trying to say is the thickness at this part is thinner than the thickness right here on this button. This mandolin will start about right here and flare out to a thickness here, which means that when you turn it this way, then we have the equivalent of it climbing up onto this button. Now I have this particular mandolin right here ready to carve the flute right down in the middle, and that brings us to the whole squiggly line thing. What I want to do is carve that flute, and I want it to be in a really pretty place and just right down the middle of that whole thing, and just be very pleasing to the eye. And to do that, I have an ordinary compass. Let me explain. We want to imagine this tangent line right here, and keep in mind that we want to come off exactly 90 degrees to this imaginary tangent line all around this thing, outside border and inside border. So much like that right there, bang, bang. Now I'm going to just keep in that imaginary tangent line, and this distance could actually vary, it doesn't really matter much, all the way around, so you can see what that line is. Now let's do the same thing on the inside. So we have an equal distance from each of these walls here. Let me darken those in so that you can see them better. one more measurement we need to have. This binding here is going to come over about like that and about like that. So I'm going to reset this compass down to that width right there. And do the same thing with the tangent line business, just trying to keep square on that outside edge. You see? All right. Now, the trick here is to blend all of those lines. If we can pleasingly blend all of those lines together, we'll be in good shape. Seems odd, doesn't it? But I usually like to come over from here about 2/3 or a third, 2/3 from here to here. Split the middle of that line right there, just go right down the middle. Then when you start to come out, we need to blend this and this together pleasingly. And I sort of start leaving that line. And if you can see, right around there, and just kind of fade right on in to this line. And that is, to my eye, the most pleasing place to put the crest of that flute. Now, let me just take an ink pen. I don't normally do this, but I'll take an ink pen so that you can, and darken that in really good so that you can see and let me erase the worst of the pencil lines. And there, you can see the secret of the squiggly lines has been solved. That's how I set the crest of that flute after the body itself has been prepared and ready to be carved. That's how I pencil it on. Swoop that out there maybe just a little bit. That's how it's done. Now, for the rest of the week, I'm going to be right here, either here, here, or here, carving scrolls and installing binding in each of these mandolins. And when I have these three that you're looking at done, I've got the last three to go as well. So I'm going to be here pretty much all week. I'll check back in with you guys on Friday. And now the work week has come and gone, and the final tally is of the 8 mandolins that we are binding now. 4 of them are completely done and cleaned up, and they are ready for the neck installation. This one here is completely bound. It's just not cleaned up yet, so that's 5 that are pretty much done. Of the 3-ply black binding mandolin here that I've been working on, it's going to California, by the way. It's down to the last 2 pieces of binding, and then I have 2, this one and another one laying off right here,
that really haven't been started yet. This one's made it as far as the jig, but it's not been worked on any at all. And so that's the final count at the end of the week. Now, we'll finish these up next week, and I certainly hope that you will come back to be part of that as well. Thank you so very much for spending a few minutes of your precious time with me. And again, my name is Audie, and you've been watching the Ratliff Mandolins Weekly Production Diary. Please check back with us each and every week. Hit the like and subscribe button and leave me a comment. I always appreciate the comments, and we'll see you next week.